Hello and welcome to Women Empowerment Edition Impact for Change. The purpose for the podcast is to provide the space for women to share their stories in an inspiring way to help impact and inspire other women. And oh my God, so today's guest is one of the inspired and impactful women that I've ever come across. She is a licensed attorney, founder of an office, law office of Amelia, Demma, which provides the service to those engaged in collaborative family formation. She has been in this field for 24 years, assisting family formation and engaging in both state and federal legislation related to infidelity. Please help me welcome the amazing attorney, Amelia. Hi, Amelia.
Hello, thank you for having me. I am so grateful that you and I are going to have this conversation, and so hopeful that your listeners will be informed and, most importantly, inspired.
Thank you so much. It's just an honor to have you, and thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast. So before we start, because I know today's topic it make me like fired. I was like thinking about the topic all the way through, and it's very, very interesting topic as well. So before we start, Amelia, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure. So I am a New York licensed attorney. I work in the field of assisted or collaborative family formation. That means that when folks are seeking medical treatment to achieve a child, and they are informed by their physician that they will need either a donor, and that might be an egg donor or a sperm donor or an embryo donor, or and sometimes parties need both, a surrogate to have a baby and to build their family and to make their dreams come true of being parents. They also need legal counsel. In addition to medical treatment, they need legal counsel in order to establish the intended parents as the legal parents. Now, in the states, that happens in the context of our statutes, our state law. International folks, and many do come to the United States. International folks will also have some federal law issues to address, which may include immigration, for example, and citizenship, for example. I have been in this field for 24 years. I started in this field working for Resolve, the National Infertility Association, our country's largest, oldest, and most established nonprofit that assists folks who are hoping for a baby but are not able to naturally come by their child. I then launched from that early start to eventually opening my law practice. My law practice is specific only to this area of law. And as I shared with you when we were off camera, I became inspired to do this work because not only did I travel my own infertility journey, I went through many medical treatments and much heartache and several miscarriages and failed cycles. But my mother, who is soon to be 100 years old, was going through infertility herself in the 1950s, where there was no medical practice for her that was specific to infertility, but also culturally and socially. In that time in the United States, the expectation of women, sadly, was to simply marry and have children. And so her siblings, her cousins, her social circles, everyone was conceiving, and my mother was not. And it was heartbreaking. Now, eventually, she and my father began their family through adoption. I have an adopted older sister. She has since passed away, but our family makeup is such that my sister was adopted, and then eventually my parents were able to conceive myself and then my brother. So I grew up with the story of not only heartache of infertility, but I also grew up with the story of the joy and the blessings of overcoming infertility. So despite the fact that I had no genetic connection to my sister, she was my sister, and I loved her more than any sibling could ever love any sibling. And we celebrated this family that came together in non-traditional means, particularly for the times. And so when it came time for me to get serious about my professional life, and knowing that I wanted to do more than just practice law, but I really wanted to be driven from my heart and connect with my clients from a genuinely deep place beyond just my intellectual capabilities and my training and my skills. I needed to come to this as a whole person. And there was, at that point when I realized who I was, a New York woman standing with a law license in my hand and realizing what I wanted to do with it, there was no other choice for me but to begin in this area of practice.
Wow. Wow. I mean, like what you've just said, and I know a lot of women, in the family, I know we're going to dig deep into this because this is such a topic that nobody have spoke before in my podcast. I don't know other platforms, but it's a very, very interesting as well, because there is always a challenge. Women always face this challenge regarding infertility and conceive, children and become, and as you could say, your mom has, she had a challenge conceiving you and your brother, but then afterward it happened. And I know people, I have like 4 of, women in my family. Until now, then they are unable to have a children. So that is absolutely, the topic itself is really, really inspiring and impactful. But before we dig deep, I know we spoke before about the law, because you also helped create a civil law.
Yes.
Regarding this. Yeah, tell us more about that.
Yes. And I look forward to diving into that discussion, but I just want to make a side comment, and I am going to ask a favor of you. Okay. If we can have a separate conversation someday about young women who are choosing a career path, who may have a moment of awareness of themselves as a whole woman. So their intellect and their their capabilities may drive them into one particular career choice. But let's take the time, because women bring their heart where they go.
Exactly.
I'd like to think that men do too, but I'm not sure. I'm not a man. I can't say 100%. I can say I see reason for doubting that, but I don't know. I can't say for sure. But isn't it wonderful if we start talking to young women who are evolving into who they will become as professional women, to remind them to also make career choices that reflect what is in their hearts? And that's so liberating to be able to do that. So not a topic for today, but promise me that we'll come back and we'll talk about that at another time.
It will be part 2 of Amelia. It will be part 2.
Good. I love that. All right. So let's talk about legislation and regulation, not only in the United States, but around the world.
Yeah.
Medical technology influences law in this area. The more advanced medical options there are for those who are not able to conceive naturally, the more call there is to the law to respond to that medical advancement, to provide a legal infrastructure for those who are undergoing these advanced medical treatments. So my area of law is referred to, the acronym is ART. I am an art attorney. That has nothing to do with beautiful paintings on a wall. I am an assisted reproductive technology attorney. Reproductive technology, medical technology, influences or calls to the attorneys in our field and informs us what we need to be doing with our policymakers. And so that's the balance between the medicine and the law. Here in the United States, for the most part, assisted family formation, collaborative family formation, and when I say assisted and collaborative, I mean medically assisted family formation that includes a donor and or a surrogate. That's the collaboration. That's the assistance. Medical treatment that includes what we refer to as the intended parents, that would be the patients, and then a donor and or a surrogate. Here in the United States, we regulate that on a state level. In other countries, there are different models for legislation. In New York, we had been without a surrogacy law for 30 years. In fact, we had a law that said that surrogacy was illegal in the state of New York. Wow. It implied, in fact, the potential for a felony charge in the state of New York. Now, that was based on old medicine, old practice. When we talk about medical advances, and you talk in retrospect 30 years ago, in just about any area of medicine, one can see how antiquated that reference would be 30 years ago. And as I said to you, our law needs to mirror what's going on in terms of medical technology. So how could we have possibly had a law in 2010, 2012, 2015 that was based on medical options from 30 years ago?
Which is not far away, by the way. I mean, like 30 years ago, it seems like it's just yesterday.
Agreed. So I had 4 colleagues in New York, women who I hold in the highest regard and have the greatest esteem for, Denise Seidelman, Lori Goldheim, Rebecca Mendel, and Denise's partner, Nina. They actually sat down and wrote the law, our surrogacy law, which also includes donor family building. And then they turned to us, their colleagues. And many of us gave input as they were drafting this very comprehensive piece of legislation. Rumbled. I didn't give her last herself, and others of us here in New York, and said, we need your help. Read what we've written, revise it, edit it, give us your input, and then most importantly, and this really is the message here, the message to professional medicine, professional women who may considering, and it is also a message to patients who are undergoing infertility treatment, donors who want to help and serve. That's a lot easier to say in the United States than it is elsewhere around the world, and I do acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But we were able to be heard in Albany, New York, which is our state capital, and that's where our lawmakers meet to consider proposed legislation. And we spent 8 years as volunteers on our time, on our dime. No one paid us. No one subsidized us. We went as volunteers and for 8 years persistently demanded of our lawmakers to update New York law so that New Yorkers who are undergoing infertility treatment could have access to donor and surrogacy family building and be established as legal parents in New York. Before we get a little bit deeper into that and the legislative process, and again, the messaging here is find your voice. However it is that you need to access lawmakers. And I realize that in certain parts of the world, that's a very risky thing to do.
Very challenging.
Very
I don't think even in here in UK, I think even we have such a law like that. I mean, like having people who devoted their time, their energy, put a lot of money, a lot of effort into bringing something like this, creating something like this and bringing it to the world. That shows how this is really important because it reflects our society as well. It reflects what women are also going through and how that law can help women and a donor as well.
I'd like to define for the audience or expand on what they may be thinking is the profile of an infertility patient. Now, my mother, like me, I inherited infertility from my mother. She was born with this medical condition. So that is one type of intended parent who may call me for the need of services. But I would like everyone in the audience to understand that many of the clients that we assist are young women who went through a cancer diagnosis before they were in family building mode, as children, as teenagers, as young women in their 20s, not contemplating at that point in their life, I'm going to be a mother next year. And as a result of undergoing various cancer treatments, were rendered infertile, which is a heartbreaking scenario. A young person has to contend with and overcome and battle cancer. They come out of that with great blessing, only to find that because of the treatment that they endured, now they can no longer naturally conceive. So cancer patients, young cancer patients, both male and female, are typically folks who will engage the services of my office and my medical counterparts. Further, we talk about our veterans in the United States who are deployed with their fertility intact and may suffer some sort of injury, either while actually in combat or otherwise in service, and now return to the United States with impaired fertility. And that issue is something that we go to Washington, D.C. once a year, and we go to Capitol Hill once a year, and we talk to our federal lawmakers and say, we have men and women who have served this country, who have left fully capable of having children, and who return from service, and now they are impaired. And the United States government owes them to support them in their desire and wish and hope to have a baby. So those are some ways to describe who the infertility patient is, who the client is at a practice like myself. So how could you not come to work every day with a big open heart when those are the people you are trying to help?
And I know with the group also, like, you guys are helping women as well, when it comes to surrogacy and also giving that surrogacy the voice and allowing them to have a decision on themselves. Because sometimes, as we spoke last week about how surrogacy sometimes don't have a voice when they go, a woman go to the hospital, wherever, they ask, oh, I want to become a surrogacy, and they tell them, oh, you're not fit to become a surrogacy. So how is that group help these kind of women, to become, a surrogacy and help other women as well in this area?
Yeah, I really so appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation with you, because beyond empowering the young professional woman, as we started out this discussion, beyond empowering the infertility patient who is with heartache, determined to become a parent, we also do need to acknowledge the autonomy of prospective donors, women as egg donors, and the autonomy of women as gestational surrogates. Now, I am fortunate for many reasons, quite frankly. I'm a very proud New Yorker. I am fortunate to reside in and having grown up in and practice in, licensed to practice law in the state of New York, which is a progressive state. We have, to my knowledge, second to Michigan. Michigan just passed the surrogacy statute. So second to Michigan, I believe, and pardon me if I'm not correct, but my recollection is that the New York law is the newest law on the books in the United States. And it is one that says women, the New York government is not going to tell you whether or not you can be an egg donor and or a surrogate. We have medical criteria that is reasonable to keep you safe, donor and or surrogate, and to keep you healthy and not put you at any medical risk. So there is medical criteria, things like age and weight and reproductive history. But if you meet the criteria that the medical profession has established as being safe and healthy, who are we as regulators in New York State to tell you whether or not you can do this? Now, in my office, I see donors who are sisters helping people who are a part of a religious congregation or other social circles. And these are women who are coming forward saying, I know this person who is suffering and wants to be a mother or wants to be a parent, and I don't want the state telling me I cannot do this for this person that I have affection in my heart for. We also have women who come forward and say, thankfully, I don't have any family members or I don't know anybody who might need my help, but there are women out there who are desperate for help and I would like to step forward. New York law has always recognized autonomy of, well, I won't say always, I'll say in recent years. We all have histories we're not proud of. In recent years, New York has progressively moved to recognizing women do not want their life choices regulated. And that is something that I think resonates with women around the world. If you otherwise have established whatever the competency is. In law, it's have you passed the bar exam. In a medical procedure, is it safe for you to proceed? In striving for athletic achievement, why does it not stop there? And why, in certain jurisdictions, is there the need for mostly men to say, okay, we agree that you can be a surrogate? Not talking about medical criteria, not talking about qualifying under medical standards. That is an absolute that we all agree is necessary. Socially speaking, for those countries around the world, and now, given our current state of the matter in the United States, which is quite worrisome, with respect to women, and our equal standing with our counterparts. Around the world, governments, I believe, in an effort simply to suppress women from expressing for themselves, choosing for themselves what they want to do with their body. Governments there are some governments that overtly say, we are going to decide what it is that you want to do, or what it is that you can do with your body, and we don't think you should be a surrogate. There are other governments who say, we are banning surrogacy in this country because surrogates are exploited. Implied in that, and what is absolutely infuriating, is that women are exploitable in this regard. Women are not being acknowledged of government. I don't need you to protect me from being exploited. I'm smart enough to do that for myself. I am smart enough to consider the risks. I am smart enough to consider the benefits. I am smart enough and able to seek medical advice as to whether or not this is safe for me. And once I have made that assessment for myself, please don't presume that I am so weak that I cannot decide for myself whether or not I want to be a surrogate. State, stay out of my way. I am informed, I am educated, and I am making this decision knowingly, assuming all risks, because this is what I want to do, and this is the best for me. That's what infuriates me in these countries. And now in certain states in the United States, we hear this notion of, do we need to protect women from surrogacy? That's misogynistic, and it's unacceptable.
But do you think it's more about social stigma? Because I know socially in some countries, surrogacy, it is kind of, they put like a label to them.
Yeah.
Like women, like if a woman decided to go and become a donor, you know, they see that woman as like, they labelize. So it's more about culturally, and I think even the law, the country itself, they abide by that, you know, by the culture as well. So I think do you think it's more there is a stigma culturally rather than it's like the law, or, you know, following the law, or maybe taking a personal decision on whether or not a woman want to become a donor?
Absolutely. Stigma is a huge hurdle. How do we address stigma? Education. Education, education, education. Raising social awareness about what this really is, as opposed to, particularly men, the messaging that has been sent out for years about this. So informing the young woman who is a little reluctant relative to the stigma, which we understand and acknowledge is real. Informing her, empowering her, standing with her, standing for her, in changing the messaging, changing the narrative. Now, change takes a long time, you know that. Any change that happens quickly probably happened too quickly. And there will be fallout from quick redirect.
Absolutely.
Change happens slowly. But now, I just want to remind you, as I said, when I started in this area 24 years ago, there was very little law. So my colleagues and I, nationwide, I have a tremendous amount of extended family of colleagues who have worked very, very hard as a group to carve this area of law. But we face that stigma from day one. We face that stigma of, why should we consider the interests of the donor? Why should we consider the interest of the surrogate? Why should we consider the interest of the intended parent as lawmakers? And so we had to educate our policymakers. Now, that's easier here in the United States. We have access to our lawmakers.
Yeah.
They are compelled to listen to us when we knock on their doors. And I acknowledge that that is not the case around the world. So what is happening in other countries is folks like myself with the legal credentials partnered with their medical colleagues are taking great risk and doing very, very brave things to try to detour or redirect this narrative of shame on you for sharing your genetic material with someone else who's hoping for a baby. That shame, imposed shame from the stigma of the social response, really goes back to what we were talking about before. So the social circle, the religious circles, the academic circles are now putting their thoughts on the young woman who should be able to be free of all of that noise around her and see clear to what is in her heart and what it is that she feels she wants to do with her body for the sake of bringing a life into the world and bringing a much desired baby into the world. I went through quite an ordeal. My children, I have twins. Sunday is their 30th birthday. So I went through this all 35 plus years ago. Medical advancements were not terrific. There was no law, or there was very little law, I should say. And even in progressive New York, there were folks who were saying, who just looked at me sort of quizzically. What are you doing? What is this that you're involved in? This sounds scary, and it sounds like science fiction. I went through so much, and my colleagues, as I mentioned when we had our introductory call, most, I can't say all, most practitioners, at least in the United States, who do this work, do this because they went through their own infertility. It is rare for me to encounter a colleague who does not have her own or his own story of heartache in not being able to have a much desired child. So when you think about what it is the infertility patient endures, the years of treatment, the years of disappointment, the expense, who can say that these folks don't want a baby? They are so, this is what their focus is at this moment in their life. They've gone through medical treatment. They've gone into debt. They've borrowed money. They have endured criticism from their religious circles, their social circles, their familial circles. And they endure and they persevere because they want to be parents. How can we not help them? Now, lots of folks will talk about adoption as a family building option. And I mentioned to you that my sister was adopted. So my family is a blended family. My sister was adopted, and I thank God every day that she was in my life. She is no longer with us, but I thank God through the adoption process that she was able to come into our family, and she was my sister. And I loved her as much as any sister would love any sister. There are challenges in the United States. There are challenges around the world with respect to adoption. It is not nearly as easy as the public presumes it to be. There are not nearly as many children available to as many intended parents for many complex reasons, including there is an interest in wanting to keep children with their birth parents, and so adoption is a secondary consideration for those children. So adoption is a wonderful family building option if it is the family building option for you, but no one has the right to say, if you cannot conceive naturally, then why not adopt? It's offensive, it's inappropriate, and it's unrealistic.
But to be honest, Amelia, I know you talked about the men that they reject this kind of law, and they even like questioning you about what you're doing, and because I think is I always come because where I come, the society are more judgmental than anything else, especially around the world. I know in New York there is different things that might be a little bit easier, but around the world they see a woman who don't or unable to conceive herself, or be pregnant and have a children naturally, as someone who is like they have that kind of like label around them as well. Like if a woman go around and find a surrogacy, the society would look at her like questioning her, like, what you doing? What you doing? You should have that child yourself. And they start looking from the eyes of judgment. And I know, and I come across a lot of cases who like I read online, and I look on the social media on how women really suffer and struggle in this area when they conceive or when they have children through surrogacy. They always judgment in there. There is always judgment, like the woman, like, why? So with the law at the moment that you are actually creating, and I know around the world people are still looking at that, but I'm sure there is a challenges that when you decide to tell us about the challenges that you have go through or you went through, and the challenge that woman that goes in surrogacy, if she want to become a surrogacy, the journey, and the woman that who want to decide to use a surrogacy to become a mother. So what challenges around those areas, and how like the law, or what the law that requires for people or for the country to create to help those women out?
Yes. Well, so we're talking straight out about shame. And before we'll talk, and we'll have that discussion that you have just raised, but I want to say first, women have internal shame. Inability to conceive is something they feel shameful about. They feel guilty relative to their partners, their spouses. They feel guilty relative to parents who are desperate to have grandchildren and who are anxious to have grandchildren. They feel shame relative to their religious community when there is an expectation of procreation or continuing on with family and such. I will tell you, with respect to that, it is real. We acknowledge it. I faced it myself. Every failure I had, I felt like I was letting my husband down, who could have perhaps, presumably, he could have certainly married somebody else, and presumably would have more easily had a family rather than all that he traveled with me. There are 3 different professional disciplines involved in assisted family formation. There is the medical, of course, there is the legal, and there is the mental health. In the United States, we have a robust commitment to addressing mental and emotional health issues because we have folks who acknowledge them as real. We acknowledge the science of mental health here in the United States. And so I am able to rely on my mental health counterparts when I have a woman who presents to me as feeling shameful about her own infertility. So let's just lay that as a foundation. Now, with respect to the surrogate and the donor being shunned by the community in some regard, being judged by the community, donation is essentially something that one can do without revealing to anyone outside of your physician. Even if you don't want anybody to know, only your physician and the nurses at the fertility clinic know that you have decided to share your genetics with someone who cannot conceive and desperately wants to welcome a baby into a loving home. Obviously, surrogates cannot conceal that they are carrying a child. And it is really interesting for us to consider then how she is perceived, to your point exactly, in the workplace. We have had instances where surrogates, for example, are teachers in Catholic schools, and they have been dismissed from their jobs because they are carrying a child for someone else in contradiction with Catholic practice, and therefore not in accordance with their employer's set of standards. I'll leave it at that. I'll refer to it as a set of standards. And we have had women take those employers, Catholic hospitals, Catholic schools, to court and say, I demand the law protect me in my autonomous decision to use my body to assist somebody who desperately is hoping to bring a baby into their loving home. And my employer cannot restrict me from exercising that autonomy. Now, those cases aren't always successful, quite frankly.
No.
There are women who lose in that argument. But again, it's going to come back to having a voice, being heard, boots on the ground, being educated, and informing the public. If we let up on that, we are never going to get where we want to go with this. So we have to be persistent, even in the face of legal failure, even when the courts say we are not siding with you, surrogate. You took a job with this institution that is governed by particular religious practices. You violated those religious practices. You should be terminated from your work. It is offensive. It is heartbreaking, but we have had those rulings. But that has not stopped us. Here I am speaking to you and hoping to reach people around the world. And I am admitting that we have had legal failures. Legal failures are simply a pause. We keep pushing. We keep driving. It is the voice of women who will get us to where we need to go, who will address that stigma. And for those in the meantime who themselves are struggling with shame, either self-imposed shame or shame imposed by a community, we have our mental health professionals who have science-based studies, acknowledged research that will show how we can move that woman from a place of shame to a place of empowerment and a place of pride.
So you're still working on that, on how you can help women.
We sure are.
Mentally and emotionally, because I know a lot of women, they will, like, when they listen to this, they will say, like, I can relate to this. And my goodness, the topic itself is so enriched and broad, and it can be like, it can take more than one episode, in a podcast. It can take actually a whole different discussion by itself, because a lot of women face this, and you said a word that really resonated with me. Like, I think about all the time, the shame.
Yeah.
The shame, because I know some people, even in my family, they still facing that shame because
Yeah.
they can't, have children. They can't, conceive. And in our religion, we don't, like, in our religion, like, we don't do surrogacy, and we just leave it as that. So if the woman don't have a children, that's it. That's like God willing, and then that's it. And I know the faith, even in different religions as well, in different countries, the shame that is women face in this, in this is now we are in 21st century, and women is still facing, like, with all the technology advancement, with all the medical advances, with all the laws that we have, women is still facing that mental challenges, and socially, and it can become so hard. And I know at some point a lot of women, you said your mom faced it and you faced it, and it can be very, 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 very challenging. So what advice would you give to these women who are going maybe through infertility, or or women who want to start a family through a donor, but hesitant because of culture, what people might say, or because what the family might say, or because what the teachers, because some people who decided to use a surrogate, some people they lost their job. Some of them, they're like directors, they're like doctors, they're really high position in the industry, and they lost their job before that. So what advice would you give to these women who are going through these kind of challenges?
And let's paint the full picture here. They have lost their job. They have been condemned by their community, either employment community, a professional community, a religious community, a neighborhood, neighbors, whatnot. We acknowledge shame. We acknowledge this control that this outside thinking has on how she can resolve her infertility. We didn't talk about isolation. Even in the United States, women feel that they are the only one. And I know that's how I felt. I felt like I was the only one, and I knew I wasn't the only one. My mother had gone through it. I knew I wasn't the only one. I had colleagues and peers, but yet that isolation, that moment when you were told it is another miscarriage, it didn't work, and you go home and there's no baby coming. I've never felt more alone in my life. And that's here in the United States. I can only, I think about, and I do, and I pray for women around the world who do not have the resources that are available to American women, and generally women in Western countries. There are resources, and they may be underground, and there may be through channels that you may not understand are available to you. Again, I mentioned when we started, Resolve, the National Infertility Association, is the oldest, largest, and most established nonprofit in the United States that assists folks who are going through infertility. Now, their reach is only as far as the United States, but there are other such groups around the world. So if you are listening and you are going through infertility and you are certain that you can't talk about it with anyone, and that there isn't a safe space for you to go to not only address your emotions, but address practical things, be in touch with me. Be in touch with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. be in touch with Resolve, the National Infertility Association. We may not have, and it is extremely unlikely that either of those two organizations will have direct resources available to you, but we will help you get the support that you need. I think that is a commitment that those of us who do this work make to women around the globe. Whether you are the infertility patient who is dealing with shame and heartache because you want to bring a baby into your loving home and you are just not yet blessed with that baby, or you want to be a donor or a surrogate to help someone you love in your family, or just to help someone, we can and hopefully will be able to connect with some resources that will assist you. Community, community, community. You are not alone. Within that community, we can find answers. The answers may be you are legally banned from doing this, but here's how we can work together to change that law. That may be the answer. The answer may be, no, I can't help you be a donor next year. Or no, I can't clear the path in your country, given the laws, for you to be a surrogate. But I can empower you with information for you to continue to raise awareness and bring this messaging forward that donor family building and surrogacy family building can be done in a fair, a balanced, a safe way that protects the interests of all of the parties, the donor, the surrogate, the parent, and the child. We can do this. We are sophisticated enough to do this. And sometimes it just takes a lot of talking and a lot of yelling and a lot of embracing and a lot of wrapping our arms around the other women who are struggling and suffering and saying, I know, I've been there. No, not where you are. I was there in the United States and I acknowledge that that is easier. But I am a woman and you are a woman. At the end of the day, regardless of what country we reside in, I am a woman and you are a woman. And you want a baby the same way I wanted a baby. And I understand. That's where we start.
Absolutely. As you said, having a voice, women, should start speaking up and accepting what they are going through. And it can be challenging. It can be absolutely challenging, and it can be absolutely tremendous. Not only in a culturally, but also mentally and physically as well, because of what they go and what you bring, Amelia. You shed the light on something that women need and will continue to, need, because a lot of women, it's not become a want, it become a need. Like, I need to start a family. I need, not only just become I want to, it also become a need. It become that desire to start that family and have that family. And what I'm hoping for is what you have started, with other women can get also inspired to do this in their country, to be able to help other women as well. So thank you so much, Amelia.
I just want to add one more note that you and I came together today to celebrate and to commit ourselves to empowering women.
Absolutely.
That's what drew us to each other.
Absolutely.
So let's just also acknowledge then that the woman who decides motherhood is not for her is to be celebrated as well.
Absolutely.
Is not to be made to feel shame for her decision. In the United States, we refer to it as child-free by choice. We used to use the word childless, but that implied she was less. Mm-hmm. So now we say child-free, which implies that she is free to have made a decision for herself whether or not she wants to be a mother. And that woman deserves celebration as well.
Absolutely, yes. We celebrate all the women, all the women around the world, and we give them, our heart with them. So I'm absolutely, I'm so grateful that, Amelia, that you have shared this light, into this topic, and let's embrace each other. Let's not be hard on each other as a woman, because I know some women themselves, they become hard on each other, and they become hard on themselves as well. So let's not be hard. Let's celebrate each other. Let's embrace each other, and let's be that power and empower and impact and inspire other women all around the world. So thank you so much, Amelia. It's been absolutely a pleasure. And I'm so grateful that you have spoken. It will be part 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely for sure. So so stay tuned. Thank you so much, and until next time, bye bye.